During World War I, Russia fought alongside Britain and France against Germany, Austria-Hungary, and their allies. On the Eastern Front, defeat followed defeat, and morale hit rock bottom. In February 1917, the Tsar was overthrown in what became known as the February Revolution. A provisional government took over but kept Russia in the war. And the economy? It just kept collapsing all the same. By October 1917, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power, promising peace, land, and bread. In 1918, they signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany, ending Russia's role in the war but losing massive territories: Ukraine, the Baltic states, and parts of Belarus. Almost immediately, civil war broke out. The Communist Red Army versus the anti-communist White forces. By 1922, the Reds had won, reclaimed most lost lands, and founded the USSR. After Lenin's death, Joseph Stalin rose to power. He pushed rapid industrialization and forced collectivization of farms and carried out brutal purges, even inside the army. In 1939, the USSR signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany, dividing spheres of influence in Eastern Europe between them. But in 1941, Germany invaded. After 4 years of brutal fighting, the Soviets emerged victorious in 1945. Post-war, the USSR controlled Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. The so-called Eastern Bloc, cut off from the West by the Iron Curtain. The Cold War began, a tense standoff with the US, featuring nuclear weapons, propaganda, and proxy wars. In 1962, the world stood on the brink of World War III during the Cuban Missile Crisis, sparked when the Soviet Union began installing nuclear missiles in Cuba just 90 miles from U.S. shores. For 13 tense days, the two superpowers faced off until a secret deal ended the standoff. The Soviets pulled their missiles from Cuba, and the U.S. later removed its own from Turkey. By the 1980s, the Soviet economy was stagnating. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became leader, introducing reforms. These reforms loosened central control, and protests began to spark across Eastern Europe. In 1989, communist governments fell, and East and West Germany reunited. In 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved into 15 independent states, including Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, Armenia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and many others. East Germany. The history of East Germany begins in the aftermath of World War II. In 1945, Nazi Germany was defeated, and its territory was divided into 4 occupation zones, controlled by the Soviet Union, the United States, Britain, and France. Berlin, deep inside the Soviet zone, was also split between all 4 powers. Tensions grew quickly between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies, marking the start of the Cold War. In 1949, the Western zones united to form the Federal Republic of Germany, or West Germany. In response, the Soviet zone became the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, with East Berlin as its capital. And yes, despite the name, it was neither very democratic nor much of a republic. It was a one-party socialist state, firmly tied to the Soviet Union. The Socialist Unity Party ruled the country, using the secret police to suppress opposition. In 1961, the East German government built the Berlin Wall to stop the mass flight of citizens to the west. Stretching for over 150 kilometers around West Berlin and heavily guarded, it became the most famous symbol of the Cold War. Through the 1970s and 80s, East Germany remained one of the more developed economies in the Eastern Bloc, though it relied heavily on Soviet support. By the late 1980s, growing dissatisfaction and reforms in the Soviet Union began to weaken the regime. Mass protests in Leipzig, the Monday demonstrations, spread across the country. Leader Erich Honecker resisted change, but mounting pressure forced his resignation. On November 9, 1989, a confused announcement led border crossings to be opened. Crowds rushed to the Berlin Wall and overwhelmed guards let them through. The wall's fall marked the end of the regime. Free elections in March 1990 brought victory to reunification supporters, and on October 3rd, East and West Germany became one nation again. Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was founded around 1299 and went on to become one of the longest-lasting empires in history. At its peak in the 16th century under Suleiman the Magnificent, it held vast territories and dominated key trade routes. It stretched across southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, basically controlling the crossroads of 3 continents and charging everyone a toll. But by the 19th century, things weren't quite so magnificent anymore. Internal decline, corruption, and nationalist movements among different ethnic groups weakened the empire. European powers like Britain, France, and Russia took advantage, calling it the sick man of Europe. Not exactly a flattering nickname, but they weren't wrong. During World War I, the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers alongside Germany and Austria-Hungary. It fought on many fronts, as against the British in the Middle East and against the Russians in the Caucasus. Despite fierce resistance, the empire gradually lost key territories. In 1916, Britain and France secretly agreed to divide Ottoman lands between themselves after the war. The borders they drew completely ignored the ethnic and religious makeup of the region. Basically, they just drew random lines on a map, however they saw fit. To make it worse, they had promised much of this land to Arab leaders in exchange for fighting against the Ottomans. And then didn't deliver. After the war, Allied forces occupied large parts of the empire, including Istanbul and much of Anatolia. The proposed peace deal would have left the Turks with only a small piece of land in the center. Mustafa Kemal, a decorated Ottoman officer who'd later earned the name Ataturk, saw the plan and decided absolutely not. He and other Turkish nationalists organized a resistance movement, setting up a rival government in Ankara. They fought Greek forces in the west, Armenian forces in the east, and French troops in the south, pushing each of them out through determined fighting and skillful diplomacy. By 1922, the nationalists had regained control of Anatolia and forced the Allies to negotiate a new settlement. In 1922, the Ottoman Empire was officially abolished. The Republic of Turkey was proclaimed in 1923. Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary was created in 1867 through the Austro-Hungarian Compromise. It joined the Austrian Empire and the Kingdom of Hungary under one monarch, Emperor Franz Joseph I. The two halves shared foreign policy, the military, and finances, but kept separate governments and parliaments. It was a vast multi-ethnic empire, home to Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Croats, Serbs, Slovenes, Italians, and Romanians. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne, visited Sarajevo in Bosnia, a province Austria-Hungary had annexed in 1908, despite Serbia's protests. Archduke and his wife Sophie were assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist tied to the secret group known as the Black Hand, which wanted all South Slavs united under Serbia. Vienna saw the murder as a direct challenge to imperial authority and issued an ultimatum to Serbia with 10 demands. Serbia accepted most but refused the key one, letting Austro-Hungarian officials operate on Serbian soil during the investigation because it would violate their sovereignty. Backed by Germany, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Russia, Serbia's ally, mobilized against Austria-Hungary. Germany declared war on Russia on August 1st, on France 2 days later, and invaded Belgium on August 4th, which brought Britain into the war. What began as a Balkan dispute over an assassination spiraled into what we now know as the First World War. In 1916, Emperor Franz Joseph died and was succeeded by Charles I, who tried to negotiate peace but failed. By late 1918, the empire was falling apart as Czechs and Slovaks formed their own state. South Slavs united into a new kingdom. Poles rejoined a resurrected Poland, and territories with Romanian majorities aligned with Romania. Hungary ended its union with Austria on October 31st. Austria signed an armistice with Italy on November 3rd. And just like that, Austria-Hungary vanished from the map. Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was created in 1918 after the collapse of Austria-Hungary, bringing together Czechs, Slovaks, and several minorities, Germans, Hungarians, Poles, and Rusins in Carpathian Ruthenia. It was a mix of cultures and languages, and somehow it all worked. At least for a while. In the interwar period, Czechoslovakia stood out as one of the few stable democracies in Eastern Europe. But ethnic tensions simmered beneath the surface. In 1938, Nazi Germany demanded the Sudetenland, border region with a large German-speaking population. Britain, France, Germany, and Italy agreed in the Munich Agreement, without inviting Czechoslovakia. Just months later, Hungary seized southern Slovakia, while Poland grabbed small border area. In March 1939, Germany occupied the rest of the Czech lands, creating the Protectorate, while Slovakia declared independence. Though in reality it functioned as a German puppet state. After World War II, Czechoslovakia was restored, minus Carpathian Ruthenia, which went to the Soviet Union. Czechoslovakia soon fell under Soviet influence and became a communist state. In 1968, the Prague Spring tried to introduce political reforms and more freedoms. Moscow responded by sending tanks, making it very clear that Spring was cancelled. In 1989, peaceful protests known as the Velvet Revolution ended communist rule and brought democracy. But the post-communist years exposed growing differences between Czechs and Slovaks in politics, economics, and how they saw the country's future. Rather than fight it out, leaders from both sides agreed on a peaceful split. In 1993, Czechoslovakia became two independent states, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, in what became known as the Velvet Divorce. Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was created in 1918 after the collapse of Austria-Hungary, uniting South Slavic peoples, Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, Bosniaks, Macedonians, and Montenegrins into one kingdom. It was first called the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, but later it was renamed to Yugoslavia. A bold idea, though putting that many ethnicities, religions, and languages under one roof was always going to be complicated. During World War II, Yugoslavia was invaded by the Axis powers. A Nazi-aligned puppet state was established in Croatia, collaborating with Germany and Italy and committing mass atrocities. But resistance grew. Communist-led partisan forces under Josip Broz Tito fought a guerrilla war and managed to liberate much of the country by themselves. Because of this, Yugoslavia avoided becoming a Soviet satellite state, and instead taking its own unique path as a socialist federation. After the war, Tito promoted the slogan, "Brotherhood and Unity," to keep the republics together. It mostly worked. A mix of stability, some economic growth, and just enough repression to keep a lid on old rivalries. But after Tito's death in 1980, the glue holding the country together started to dissolve. Nationalist tensions rose, the economy faltered, and by the early 1990s, the country began tearing apart. Slovenia and Croatia declared independence first, followed by Bosnia and Herzegovina and Macedonia. What followed was a series of brutal wars and ethnic conflicts that tore the Balkans apart.